have a quorum of the,
They're not ready.
oh, sorry.
Do you want me to pass out a sheet? Sign in?
Yeah, let me pass out a sign-in sheet.
Pass, can I go ahead and get some paper?
Yeah, of course.
We're on? Okay. All right, so we're going to call a meeting to order. We do have a quorum of the Airplane Noise Committee, and we do have a quorum of the Board of Selectmen. David Burns is going to be here. He got tied up at another meeting, so he's going to be a few minutes late, but he will nonetheless be here. So I guess this is a joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and the Airplane Noise Committee to discuss several topics. We will have a citizen speak, and that will be the first thing on the agenda. And so if anybody would like to come up. And I might say, we're going to limit citizen speak to 15 minutes in total, so if, I don't know how many people want to speak, but let's try and make it 4 or 5 minutes, no more.
And before you speak, if you could also, can we give them a sign-in sheet to sign in, please? With your name and also if you can state who you are when you're speaking.
Where's the sign-in sheet?
We're going to pass one down to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Phil Johanning, 23 Parkwood Drive in Milton. I have 4 things I want to quickly mention, and 2 of them have to do with items mentioned at Board of Selectmen's meeting. Tom said during one of the recent Board of Selectmen meeting that we can't turn back time regarding technology, and I think I want to make it clear that no one is suggesting that. No one is suggesting that turning back time with respect to technology is what we want to do. I sent to the Board of Selectmen today a copy of Mike Capuano's comments made on the 33L EA. Does anybody want a copy? Okay.
Sure, I'll take it.
Sure. And what Mike Capuano, who is on the Infrastructure and Transportation Committee and the FAA Subcommittee, said was that he favored a concept called fanning. And what fanning involved is like an oscillating fan. He's saying that if you can use satellite guidance to create a narrow path to go from outside of Logan into the runway, that you could just as easily create an oscillating pattern of approach. So what he said was he favored the idea of fanning so that one community or one set of households would not be affected by every single arriving flight, let's say on 4R or 4L. So what we as a group at Fair Skies Boston have always preferred was Mike Capuano's idea, the idea he presented in the 33L EA, that fanning would be a much better concept to spare the same people, the same noise, and the same pollution repeatedly. Tom also mentioned that he hadn't seen any area of Milton where the DNL was higher than 55. One thing I'd like to say is the 1974 measure DNL is not highly regarded, but we do understand that it's standard. But DNL is a poor measure of noise, but it doesn't capture at all the idea of dwell. Dwell is the idea that something's over you constantly, and dwell is completely ignored by DNL. And the problem we have in Milton is noise, but more so it's dwell. If an airplane passed over my house every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes, I think I would be less passionate about this cause. But the fact is, I get one every 30 to 45 seconds when the 4R is being used, and that is excessive dwell. The next thing I wanted to talk about was something that Cindy Christensen brought to our attention at Fair Skies Boston quite a while ago, and that was an MIT study that talked about false alarms. When 2 aircraft get too close together, an alarm is going to go off to indicate that there could be a collision, that the pilot needs to be aware, super aware at that moment that there's too much proximity with another aircraft. When 4R and 4L were built, everything was different. And if those runways were to be built today, they would be farther apart. So what happens is that there are constantly alarms going off in the cockpits, and that was what the MIT study addressed. So one of the things I was thinking about was that we could actually take the approaches of 4R and 4L. We could suggest that they take the approaches for 4R and 4L and move the 4R approach south toward Braintree and 4L north toward Dedham, so that they're farther apart as they approach the foot of the runway. And that would mean that they're farther apart than they would be if they flew in parallel during the entire approach until they actually touch down, and I think that would be preferable. Right now what they do is stagger, but I think it actually would be safer for everybody to move the approaches apart at the outside, let's say. And I think that's something that we really need to bring to the attention of the CAC and of Massport and of the FAA if 4L goes forward. The other thing is that if we don't get someone to move these approaches apart until they actually touch down, one of the things I have repeatedly mentioned, and that I think this Board of Selectmen really need to push, is the idea that Massport needs to fund the Milton Fire Department and Milton EMTs in the event of an emergency. And I think we also have to have accident training, let's say. Why? They do it they did it in Quincy Bay, they did it at Logan Airport, but what about in a community? And I wonder if during rush hour, if there was an aircraft accident, how would injured people be moved to hospitals, and which hospitals would be used? If we never have an emergency drill, how will people know how to react? How would we get triage people to the site? Who would treat, what would we do about fires on the ground, fuel spills on the ground? What would we do about all that disaster and catastrophe if we're not prepared? And I wonder, how prepared is the Milton Fire Department with chemicals to put out a fuel fire? And if we're not prepared with that, why wouldn't FAA or Massport or some governmental entity be involved in that? If we need $37 million to rebuild our fire stations, and if we would be primarily responsible in the event of an aircraft accident, I honestly think that we should approach Massport about sharing the cost. You may say, how likely is it that there would be an aircraft accident? I need only remind you that in 2010, stowaway Delvante Tisdale fell to his death on my street. And so if you don't think that it could possibly happen, I only think about, what if there was a car underneath Delvante Tisdale? Or what if there were people walking under Delvante Tisdale? That may not have injured a lot of people other than Delvante Tisdale. I don't know. But, it indicates that, aircraft accidents are possible in Milton, and we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to find a way to make Massport take responsibility for the cost of being prepared. The last thing I want to mention, again, is the famous letter that came from Darrell Palmictor, the president of the Logan CAC. I felt that his opinions were, by and large, inaccurate. And I think that his letter was meant to induce the town to remove Cindy from the CAC, and I think the Logan CAC, and I think that was done because he fears that Cindy could be an obstacle to completing Plans 3 on time, as Plans 3 is currently imagined. And, the thing that is clear to me, David had mentioned during that meeting that people don't get along with Cindy. One of the things that I was impressed by was after one meeting at the Logan CAC, when Cindy ran for president, she got 10 votes, and Darrell got 16. Cindy had been to one meeting. Darrell had been there for many, many, many years. So if you look at support for Cindy and support for Darrell, in my mind, if Cindy had only been there for one meeting, there isn't a lot of difference. So I believe that Darrell's letter was self-serving, and it was meant to eliminate, to get the town, to induce the town to eliminate Cindy from the Logan CAC, and I think that would be a huge mistake for us. Cindy has given me a number of documents, including meeting minutes.
Mr. Johanning, you've been talking for quite a while now. Can we?
I'm wrapping it up. From the CAC. And this is important because what it does is it identifies 6 communities heavily impacted by noise, and the number 2 community is Milton. Yet Bland's Phase 3 doesn't specify any goals for what it's trying to do in terms of noise reduction for the 6 communities. If it's not doing that, how is it really addressing noise? If we have 6 communities heavily impacted, and the goals of Bland's Phase 3 don't have anything to do with noise reduction in those communities, what is it all about? What it appears is that Bland's Phase 3 is only about achieving rotation of runway use. But if you look at the pattern of selection for runway use, Milton is always at the number 1 or number 2 position. Milton's going to end up with 40% of the noise as opposed to maybe 35 today. Milton is in a position to lose ground as opposed to gain ground under Bland's Phase 3. I think, honestly, we need to be sure that Cindy continues to fight vigorously for us. And I think Milton, the Board of Selectmen, need to write a letter to Darrell Pommichter supporting Cindy 100%. So that he understands that his efforts failed and that we have a vigorous person who will help us. I guess that's all I have to say. I think, as far as the ANAC is concerned, we're ready to work with the ANAC, and I think if there's a good leader, we would be willing to help. Thanks.
Want to come up? And if you can just sign in also on the form.
Okay, I will do so.
We're not allowed to respond, are we, during citizens' speak?
We usually don't go back and
Typically
forth on
not.
that, no.
Thank you. Tim Kernan. I'm president of the Brush Hill Area Neighborhood Association, an association that represents approximately 100 families in an area that is geographically defined roughly as the border between Boston and Route 138, so it's a rather large, long strip of property. I'm here really to reiterate the comments I made to the selectmen, so I apologize for duplicating my comments that the selectmen have already heard. But I wanted to sort of express the feelings to this board that oftentimes in the press we hear lots about this committee representing East Milton, and I'm sure that there's a lot more, as I haven't followed the situation as closely as I perhaps should. There seems to be a lot of attention given on East Milton. And I do want to bring to the attention of this board that we in the western part of Milton really feel the impact just as much as everybody else does. And we certainly appreciate your taking the front line on this fight for us. And if there's anything we can do for you or with you in partnership with you, please reach out to us. I do have people calling me on a periodic basis complaining about noises from planes that are extremely low. I live up on a higher part of the town, and I can feel like I almost can reach up and touch the planes. So we're right behind you. We understand the issues you're fighting against, and just want to let you know that we would like to participate with you and join in your efforts here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else for citizen speak? Oh, yep, you may come up. You can come up. Could you please sign in for us? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Irene Walzak, and I'm actually a neighbor. I'm in Hyde Park. And I'm the Logan CAC rep for Hyde Park. I was appointed by Rob Consalvo, and then I continue to serve under Tim McCarthy. And collaborated very early on with the grassroots group here in Milton. Many of the people sitting around the table I know and I've worked with in the past. And collaborate with our neighbors. I'm the chair of the Quality of Life Committee for our Fairmont Hill Neighborhood Association. So that involves our annual yard sale in September. In the last 2 years, we've involved the people on Smith Road as well as Beacon Circle and Beacon Street. And the garden group, we do the flowers at the bottom of Fairmont Hill at Fairmont and Truman as a neighborhood collaboration for the garden group. And I got involved with the airplane noise actually from working on the Foul Metal project with some people from Milton, and there was noise that started coming over Fairmont Hill. We'd never had noise previously. And I was put in touch with Judy Kennedy, and at that time the Grassroots Committee was being formed for 33L. I did not understand what 33L was all about at the time. However, as I went forward in trying to explain it to my neighborhood, I realized that it probably wasn't something we wanted, and that an appeal was going to be appropriate. So my background, I'm a scientist by training. My background's in biochemistry and molecular biology. I've developed medical instrumentation, a lot of optical instrumentation. And I've had a passion for flying since I've been about 12 years old. My uncle took me up in a small plane. And I have a private pilot's license. I have an instrument rating. I have commercial hours and training in DC-3. So that's some of my qualifications for my role as the person being appointed from Hyde Park for the Logan CAC. With the Grassroots Committee, I've always been willing to help Milton with what's been, because we share, I mean, I'm a neighbor to Brush Hill Road, the Brush Hill Road Association, and we share the same issues. Fairmont Hill is only 2 miles square, and we have the same 5 RNAVs the Milton has. I'm very concerned about the 4 left. However, the 27s, we experience those starting at 5:15 in the morning. The 33s, the 27s come over the back of the backyard, the 33s over the front. We get the go-arounds from the 4 right as well when that happens. I've testified at Board of Selectmen's meetings in the past when the Grassroots was first starting, and also at the meeting with Representatives Lynch and Pt.1 when they were here in Milton to support you guys and to try and bring some of the issues with respect to the fact that the planes are so low, that they're not following the procedures as published. As far as the Bland's 3 goes, the Bland's 3 is, I wasn't involved in phase 1 or phase 2. I went to the first meeting for Bland's 3 and learned very shortly afterwards that we have procedures that are published as to rules and regulations as to how we're supposed to interact with different people. At the time, Sandra Coons has been president for most of the time that I have been on the CAC. Daryl Pemichter was just elected, and in all fairness, I do believe he has helped the town of Milton on several occasions with sending information to them. And I do also know that at the meeting that I went to for Plans 3, the FAA was not very accommodating to Daryl. They didn't like, he's an engineer from MIT. He's very bright, and he has an unbelievable memory for remembering. He's been on this for 20 years. And he has very good points as far as the Plans 3. In fact, right now, the Plans 3 is stopped. It's not going any forward for Test 3 until we get the data for Test 1 and Test 2. So we've had two, in Plans 3, we've had Test 1 for 6 months, and then followed very shortly afterwards by Test 2 for 6 months. I voted against both of these. I opposed both of these, Test 1 and Test 2. As a scientist, there was absolutely no historical background data, and there were no I'm into measurable metrics. You know, what are we going to measure here when we're doing this? And I realized that very quickly, looking at the sequences that they had put together, that they were biased. However, it didn't seem to make a difference because the only metric for Plans 1 was that they change the runway at least once they try and change the runway departure at least once a day. It seems sort of silly to me because we have winds from the land and winds from the sea, and if you're a sailor, you understand that the wind changes once a day anyway, so chances are they are going to change it at least once a day. And then in Test 2, so Test 1 was for them to change the departure runway once a day. So in phase Test 2, they were going to change the arrivals once a day. I think, personally, as a pilot, when you're doing a departure, the planes are on the runway. They're sitting there. So it's not a big deal. But when you have planes stacked up coming in, and you want to say move them from the north to the south, that's not trivial for a controller to do. And actually, I think there may be some safety issues involved with that. Daryl also opposed these, just so you understand that he did oppose. He and I and one other person, there were 3 of us who opposed Plans 1 and Plans 3. And you probably...
A few more minutes, okay.
Right. You probably wouldn't have access to that. The other thing I wanted to say is, in December of 2015, the CAC, under Daryl's leadership, we made 6 motions that were voted unanimous, and it's the first time ever that motions, well, actually, this was at the end of Sandra, and the reason Sandra left. We had 6 motions. The first motion was, I made the first motion, and one of the things that I wanted to see in the data for Plans 3 was the RNAVs. Where are the RNAVs? And where are the flight tracks? Because I don't personally feel, and I don't have the data, this is a problem that we have with Massport is getting data, I don't believe the planes are actually following the RNAVs. So it's very difficult to determine when the planes are actually overflying you. For example, the 33Ls that come over my part of Fairmont Hill and the parts of Milton over near Curry College, those planes are taking an early turn, and they're not really following the RNAV. If they followed the RNAV, they would be over in Dedham, over near the mall in Dedham, and they would probably be following 128 south, and they would be around 8,000 to 10,000 feet, as the RNAV originally stated. However, they're only about 4,000 to 6,000 feet when they overfly us. So people are saying, well, they're at 10,000 feet. Well, they're really not, because they're not following the RNAV. They're making an early turn.
We're going to have to wrap it up, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So I just wanted to mention that I'm willing to help in any way I can. And the part that I think is probably something has just recently come up with respect to a Representative Meng, M-E-N-G, in New York City, who's in the House of Representatives, and who is asking that the EPA take the responsibility of overseeing the pollution from the FAA. And under pollution, I put noise, because I consider noise a health issue, the chemicals, the carcinogenic chemicals, as well as the particulates. And particulates are measured at 10 microns, 2.5 microns, and now we have nanoparticles, which are called ultrafine particles. And the ultrafine particles are the ones that we need to be, all of these we need to be concerned with. And the Mass Health Study talks about the incidence of asthma in children and COPD in adults.
Yeah, we're gonna have to
So
wrap
if there's
up. All
any
right.
way I can help, I'm willing to help. But I just wanted to.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, I do have one other, I have one other issue that I have to deal with,
Tom?
and that is.
Yeah, we really have to
I
move on.
understand, but this is extremely important. Somebody sent me a copy of a report that's going to be given later by Cindy. And in Cindy's report,
Could we,
Yeah.
I really not, would
well,
prefer not to do this.
my name, I'm
I
here as
understand,
part
I
of it.
understand, we can do this not at a meeting, but,
Okay, fine.
Okay, thanks. All right. Is anybody else for citizen speak, or it's pretty much time we have allotted? Okay, so we're going to go on to the approval of the minutes for the committee members.
before you do that,
Yeah.
can we just introduce the committee for
Oh, sure.
purposes of, I mean, I think most people know the selectmen, but most people, I don't think, do know the Airplane Noise Committee.
Okay.
This is the first
Sure.
time being televised, so if
Okay.
you'd like to start with you, Roxanne, and
Sure.
move
I'm
around.
Roxanne Musto, Chair of the Airplane Noise Advisory Committee.
Caroline Kinsella, Health Director.
Mike Andrusino's my first meeting on the committee.
David Burns, member of the Board of Selectmen.
Anne Marie Fagan, Town Administrator.
Luna Killingback, just a member.
Jen Goonan.
Barbara Martin.
David Godine, I'm the CAC alternate.
Katie Harlan from the Board of Selectmen.
And Tom Hurley, Chair of the Board of Selectmen.
Karis North, Town Council.
Okay. So I just want to go through the approval of the minutes for the committee, for the Airplane Noise Advisory Committee. Did everyone get a copy of those, or does everyone have a copy with them from the committee? Muna, do you have one, and Jen?
We can share it, we'll share.
Okay. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. If you haven't, if you could just take a moment to look at it and see if there are any questions or changes or anything that you want to add or change on that.
I have one comment. Under the conflict of interest open meeting, like we had discussed an entry on the Facebook page that some had thought was inaccurate, and we talked about, because it mentioned some health repercussions, but during that discussion, I asked the question about where we are documenting in the town, where the health repercussions, like where can people write to have them documented? I think Caroline said you had received many letters at the Board of Health. Is that, I was just curious how we were, if we had a process, if we had, about that.
Okay.
I think you mentioned that, so I think that should be added to the minutes.
So do you want the minutes amended?
Yeah.
To add a line in?
Yep.
Okay, how would you like to have it read?
The committee also discussed where health impacts were, where and how health impacts were being documented by the town, officially documented by the town.
Did you get that?
I think so. The committee
Okay.
asked where health impacts were being officially documented
Yeah.
by the town. Yeah, if they were, too, I should say if and where,
Okay.
if and where, health impacts were being documented by the town.
Okay. Are there any other changes?
thank you.
Any other changes? Do you have a chance to look at them? Are we all set? Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to approve them with that change. Okay, so I'll make the motion to approve the minutes with the change that Mona identified. All those in favor? I seconded first. You seconded, David. All those in favor that were there?
Aye.
Okay, that's approved. Thank you. Okay, the next thing is, we're going to switch around a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to actually ask Karis to speak a little bit about roles of being on a committee, conflict of interest and things like that. So we can open up with that.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thank you, Roxanne. As I said before, I'm Karis North. I'm an attorney at Murphy Hesse, and we're town council for the town of Milton. Yesterday, the committee chair and the town administrator asked me to just talk to you a little bit about your responsibilities as a member of a public body, a town committee, and particularly your responsibilities with respect to the open meeting law. So I just wanted to give you just some brief points to remember as you are a committee of the Board of Selectmen, you work for the town, you are doing the business of the town. So you are considered a public body, which is any multiple member board that is created or appointed with a public purpose. And what that means is that when you have deliberations, when you have a quorum, which is a simple majority of the board members, that deliberation, which is any communication, oral or written, through any medium, including email or phone or sitting in a coffee shop, has to be done in the public session, in the public meeting. And that's a public meeting that has to be posted with appropriate notice and an agenda, and minutes have to be taken, and there are certain formalities that have to be respected. So I just want to remind everybody that that's an important aspect of sitting on a public board. There are just some limited exceptions. You can circulate an agenda. You can talk about scheduling, you can talk about procedural information, you can distribute reports or documents to be discussed, but you cannot provide your opinion to the rest of the body by email about any of your substantive opinion about any of those documents or things that are expressed. You also can't participate in what's called serial communications, a string of emails where someone says, what about this? And somebody else says, what about that? All of that work is work for the town of Milton and has to be done in these public meetings and public sessions. And so that's just the basic overview of the requirements. As I said before, there have to be minutes taken, which you obviously already do. There has to be an agenda and topics. And then you also do have the opportunity to meet in executive session when there are some specific reasons, and there are very limited reasons, and if you have specific reasons, you can talk to your chair, talk to the town administrator, or talk to me, and we'll determine if that's an appropriate thing. So that's just the overview. If you have any specific legal questions about participating on a public body or the requirements of the open meeting law, you can contact the town administrator, who knows a lot about the process, and she can talk to me if there's any specific questions that she needs counsel on. But that's what I wanted to start with talking about. So, do you want me to give my update as well now, or do you want to do that?
Sure, and then just
Okay.
open up, I suppose, if we have any questions
Yeah,
about
actually,
that
are
as
there any
well.
questions on what I've laid out?
I do have a quick question, Karis.
Sure.
I know we have several members that are also on the grassroots committee, so can you help sort of define in terms of if things are posted on there and they're also sitting on this committee, you know, and they're representing the town, if things have maybe a negative flavor towards, you know, Board of Health or Board of Selectmen, you know, a little bit about that.
Well, I
perhaps.
think everybody has to remember that their public statements can be associated with the work that they're doing as part of this committee, and be careful in you know, what you say in the public. that's really the best advice that I can give you, and that, you know, you just have to remember that you are representing the town of Milton by being a member of this committee.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions? Okay.
So probably if you can give an update, that'd be great.
Sure. So on the legal front, I have a couple of things to update everybody on. I just wanted to remind everyone that we've been working with the town and the Board of Selectmen on these FAA issues since about 2012. On the legal issues, that I'm in regular contact with the Board of Selectmen about, you know, legal positions and options, and what kind of action may or may not be possible, and we meet in executive session to talk about those issues. I am the things that I'm doing include monitoring the actions in other cities and towns like Phoenix and DC and New York, speaking with their counsel, trying to understand the basis for their legal actions and whether that's something that could be useful to Milton or not. You know, the key is finding a valid, the underpinning legal action, and that's what I'm evaluating and talking to the Board of Selectmen about, and, you know, present to the Board of Selectmen risks and benefits, and then they ultimately have policy decisions to make about those presentations. We're also have been asked to consider the appropriateness of a technical noise expert, and I've begun doing some preliminary analysis of who may be out there and how such an expert would be useful. But again, we have to have sort of the underpinning action to make that advice useful, and we're working on at least doing some preliminary information and some preliminary screening. On the policy and legislative front, I have also been working with Congressman Lynch's office I'm in regular contact with them, and in fact spoke to one of the staffers today who provided me an update that I can share with everyone, that Congressman Lynch is going to be signing on as a co-sponsor to the Quiet Communities Act that somebody just spoke about in the public session. I know there had been a request to ask him to do that, and that should be happening any day now. I asked for an update about the Quiet Skies Caucus and their work on the FAA reauthorization. That legislation, that reauthorization was given a 6-month extension, and it is unlikely that there'll be any further work before next year on that piece. But that is a political piece to where there is some opportunity to put some pressure on Congress to change or add some requirements to what the FAA has to do with respect to considering whether the DNL is still the appropriate standard, and whether the 55 instead of the 65 should be the appropriate standard, and some other things. And there is a copy of the Quiet Skies Caucus letter that might be on the town website. I know the town has it, and I know it's been circulated around, that talks about some of the issues that caucus is looking at, and many of those issues are issues that Milton raised in its letter to the FAA on the 4 left RNAV. We talked about the congressman's meeting with FAA Administrator Herta, and what is expected to come out of that meeting is a community meeting at some point. They are still working on scheduling and didn't have anything definitive they could say about scheduling that meeting, but that information, as soon as something was scheduled, will be transmitted to the town so that we can have that discussion. It will be a community meeting for everybody, not just Milton. Let's see. On the political front, I also asked the staff member what sort of information this committee could gather and provide. This committee or Cindy, and I know Cindy has spoken with him on some issues and provided some information that would be useful. And when we talk later about the goals and objectives, I can talk about that in a little bit more detail. I'm also working on correspondence for the board. We did the 4 left letter. We're going to talk about a comment letter on the Logan 2014 environmental data report coming up, and any other correspondence as needed. Let's see, anything else? I think that's sort of the major summary of the things that I've been working on behalf of the town and the Board of Selectmen since our last meeting. So, any questions on any of that?
Yes, can you just say a word about how, because we've had some inquiries about the cost of litigation?
Yes, yes, thank you. As you know, some of you know, I live there, and in 2002 or 3, the town sued Massport as part of the 27's construction litigation, and ended up spending, from what they've said in town, about $400,000 on that litigation to get results that they feel like were really no results whatsoever, and have, the last meeting I attended that talked about it there has really decided that they don't feel that the legal options are good, because the standard that you have to get over to make the FAA change what they've done is so difficult, and it only gets you some additional analysis. It doesn't actually stop the construction of the runway necessarily. It just make them go back and do some additional analysis, and usually they end up coming up with the same recommendations. So Hull has actually really decided that its focus is going to be through the CAC and through the political channels, and trying to use their legislators to put pressure. So that's what I have learned through them, and I think that's something that Milton has been involved in and should continue to be involved in as well. Any other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to switch around a little bit in the order. Caroline, I don't know if you could give an update on the Massport. Do you have anything to pass out? Or?
Oh, yeah. So this is a report about the Massport Community Advisory Committee that I'm a part of. The October 1st, 2015 scheduled meeting did not have a quorum. The initial language of the statute calls for 40 members, and based on open meeting law, 21 members had to show up to constitute a quorum. There were only 19 members in attendance. Informally, the bylaws were reviewed, and another meeting will be set up hopefully by November. It is hopeful that the statute can be amended to read that a quorum consists of the majority of the appointed members rather than the entire amount. This legislation passed in the House, Bill H. 3773, and must now go to the Senate and the Governor's office for approval. So this is the second meeting that I've had that there has not been a quorum. And there also has been 8 members from the towns that still have not been appointed. So there's a bit of stalling going on. So we're just going to hope that it's approved and we can have a quorum at our next meeting.
When is the next meeting scheduled? Do they have anything
It's not scheduled yet, yeah, but they're hoping for that statute to be amended. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Caroline, have they talked about what the scope of their mandate is going to be yet?
No, they have some bylaws that they've worked on, a couple of drafts, but really no. The goals or objectives, no.
I think if Cindy would come up and talk to the Logan CAC, give us a discussion of land survey.
Cindy Christensen. So my guess is most of you had a chance to watch my report to the selectmen from 2 weeks ago, and you've also heard a lot about the Blance 3 from my friend and colleague Irene, who's the CAC rep from Hyde Park. So I think to move things along, I'll ask you, do you have questions about anything I presented 2 weeks ago or about my recommendations?
Well, I'm just wondering if you would represent, because we do have different people here, and this is being televised, and if people didn't watch that meeting, it might be helpful.
All right. So I believe that the Blance 3 study was designed to allow and encourage overuse of the runway 4 arrivals and also overused in particular, the 27 departures. I have recommendations that I made to the Board of Selectmen. There are 3 of them. One is to that the town of Milton should contact Massport, the FAA, the Logan CAC president, along with the consultant, and ask for a meeting where they can help explain Phase 3 to the Board of Selectmen and/or the public. My reason for making that recommendation is more so that we ask than we actually have it done. I think it's important to ask. My second recommendation is that the all elected boards, commissions, committees in the town of Milton write a letter to the Logan CAC president, Massport, FAA, Phase 3 consultant, saying that we oppose the design of Phase 3 and that the testing should be stopped immediately, and a new plan developed that more fairly distributes planes across the Metroplex. My concern is that there's about a year or less left in Phase 3, and they're spending money. So the money's going to run out. We're going to be left with a Blands 3 plan that simply tries to change configurations, and I believe is developed to send as many planes as possible, particularly onto the 4s, where they can land 61 planes an hour. If you need evidence of that, you can look back at the VOPE study that was presented in May at the FAA hearing, where they talk about 40% use for the 4s. I also encourage that there's a reach out to adjoining communities, that they join us in recommending a revamp of the Blands 3 design and project. And I've made many contacts with neighboring communities, and I can help you with that. I believe Milton needs a paper trail, possibly if they decide to litigate or they not, that it's important to make these statements now. The train has left the station. I was not a CAC member when Phase 3 began. The testing began about a year ago. The planning for it began about 2 years ago. So you can kind of see what's happening. We're about 2 years into the plan. There's probably another year to go. The consultant is spending money, and we've got a plan that's not going to work for Milton. The reason that I need help is after the last meeting, I made a comment that things weren't working well for Milton. And somebody in the meeting, this is a meeting of about 30 communities, usually about 25 people show up. Somebody said, has it gotten any worse for Milton? My comment was that I don't know how it could possibly get any worse for Milton. 2 other representatives spoke up and said, but it's been better for us. So because you said it's not any worse for Milton and it's better for us, the plan's working really well. I realized at that point I can't win this fight myself, and I don't want the responsibility of trying to fight it myself. I cannot get a majority of CAC members together to fight this battle myself, and so I need help. So the day after the meeting, I started reaching out for help, and here we are today. I'm sitting here asking for your help. That's it. I'll take questions.
Cindy, how much money does that committee have?
I don't know. I can find out for you, but it's in some paperwork somewhere.
And
I mean,
is that being used for the consultant? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And who funds that?
Massport, I believe.
Oh, Massport funds it.
Is a, I,
FAA funds the consultant.
okay.
The Blands 3 scope of services says that there's, at least was supposed to be, a consultant for the operator and a consultant for the CAC. Are there 2 consultants, or is there just one?
I don't know. I know Rob Adams is the one that works with our committee. There may be others. I can look at some of they have a, what they call it, everything's an acronym, PMT. I forget what that stands for, but it's the higher-ups of the committee plus the FAA and Massport that meet, and so it might be in some of those documents. You know, this is a committee that receives probably, 10 pages of material a day for the most part. I mean, it's very hard to keep up. And I've been having to do a lot of back reading because I was only appointed in May, although I was following this during the time that Chris Ambuda was CAC rep.
And what kind of data is being generated by this by the studies?
Yeah, so far, we've seen a report from Test 1, where Test 1 was the goal of Test 1 was to see whether or not FAA could routinely change configurations from what they end a day with and what they begin the next day with. Some of the problems with that is that they have failed to take into account in their design that several communities like Milton have more than one configuration over them. So, for example, those of you that are under both the 27s and the 4s, it's the FAA gets ranked as having a good day, basically, if they end, say, Saturday night using the 4s until midnight and then wake you guys up the next morning with 27 departures. That gets counted as a good thing under Test 1. So we have seen preliminary data in a draft report on that, and they're not doing a very good job. One of the things, both Irene and I have brought this up, it's really, the way to report this data is not how many times, what percentage of the time are they able to do this, but of the times that they're able to do it for safety reasons, meaning strong wind directions, what percent of the time can they do it? They're boasting that they did it during this 6-month period for about 70% of the time, but that includes times when they had to do it because the wind direction changed to the point that it wouldn't have been safe to not change it. So they're really using the wrong denominator in their percentage, and we're hoping to make that change. The other thing that's most disturbing, though, about this report of data that we got is they ask both the FAA and Massport to create a table that shows the percentage of time that configurations were changed or that arrival configurations were changed over this 178-day period. The FAA and Massport are off by, I would say, 20% on many of these categories. So, for example, in, let's say, April of 2000, what would it have been, this year, 2015, the FAA says we did well. We got our gold star for switching from the night to the morning 33% of the time, whereas Massport says, no, it wasn't 33%, it was 21%. So that's how different their numbers are, and that's quite disturbing because, you know, it's kind of like you have somebody turning in a paper to be graded, and one person gives them an A+, and the other person gives them a C-. They're using supposedly the same data, but they're coming up with different numbers. This is how messy and convoluted and non-scientific these studies seem to be, is you can find things like this all in their documents. It's really, this would never pass something like peer review. The study design would never get past a proposal committee. It wouldn't get past, you know, colleagues in any university. It's really quite a mess.
Thank you.
Cindy, explain to me and maybe to the other people, what exactly is the difference between and the responsibilities of the, quote, old CAC and the new Logan CAC?
Okay, yeah. This is my understanding. When it started up, you know, the Logan CAC that David and I are both members of is finalizing this Blands 3. And this is the end of the charge for this committee. This committee is unique in that it's an incorporated nonprofit. By that, it does not have to follow open meeting laws. And so a lot of the conversation that happens, we have a meeting every 2 months, but a lot of the conversation that happens by email in between that time. My understanding about Massport is the Massport Committee, many members of the Logan CAC are also members of the Massport. And they actually recommend the people who have been doing this for a long time, some of the 15, 20-year representatives think that makes for a stronger situation. But there's also some pushback from, my understanding is the Massport, in that they don't like the idea of the Massport CAC. They don't want it to have much power. And so they even looked into problems with possibly conflict of interest of people serving on both. So there's a lot of that kind of squabbling going on. Massport and the legislatures have a whole lot more control over the Massport CAC than they do the Logan CAC. My understanding about the difference in scope is that the Massport CAC doesn't want to have to deal with noise, although I've also heard that it can come back up. They want to look, there's a very strong CAC rep from Somerville who's actually been quite helpful to me on the health front. He's really pushing for the Massport CAC to look at health issues, which I think is a great idea. They have legislative funding, so they have administrative support. Logan CAC doesn't. We have this consultant, but we don't have. Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
still confused.
What the difference is?
I don't understand what the difference in responsibility is.
Yeah, well, one of the features of the Massport CAC, my understanding is in order to get it passed by the state legislature, is that they had to expand it past Logan.
Yeah.
So part of the problem that Caroline speaks about is that it also represents Hanscom and Worcester airports. So you can imagine trying to get a committee meeting together at Massport with people from Worcester when the topic is going to be something that's going on at Logan. They're supposed to deal with things like environmental concerns at and around the airport, employee concerns. So it's very broad compared to what the Logan CAC has dealt with as far as more the flights, the paths, and now the noise study. So my understanding is they can deal with almost anything that involves Massport, not just planes. It can be, or the trucks idling too long on.
But after Bland's Fruit 3, there is no old CAC.
That's correct. It's gone. The problem I see, though, is that, the Massport's notorious for bragging about its ability to work with communities, and they often cite working with the Logan CAC. And so if they have a report in their hands that says this has been approved by this group of 30 communities, and the result for Milton is that we're being bombarded with planes, that's not going to be a good thing.
Right, and you see this in Capiano's report. It says, note that through a separate process, CAC voted to eliminate fanning in the Blands.
Yeah, it's really hard to be kind of the minority communities in this. Because, like I say, there's about 30 voting members, and
we get steamrolled.
It's really hard, particularly when, I think over the years, Milton it's kind of been creeping up on us. We've been getting more and more planes, more and more flight paths. And I know people have been working hard at trying for that not to happen, but I also see that it's almost impossible to stop that from happening given this CAC process.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Good.
Comment. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, Cindy, so we have at least one new member here, so I was wondering if you could just give us in a nutshell what what the problems are with the Blands 3 and what will lead to, having 40 or 50%. Is there a way to, I know it's really complicated, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, Irene had mentioned some of these, but I'll repeat them. The Blands 3 is supposed to be looking at a fair distribution of planes across the Metroplex. There's, I have an official statement, but it's basically that. What this consultant seems to have focused on, and the CAC authorities have gone along with it, is that this idea of changing configurations throughout the day, that what really bothers people is to have 18 hours of arrivals, which of course we still have, even though they're doing this testing. But that, being a side point, so what Blands 3 now is working on is basically, are they switching runways? However, the charge is to also look at runway end use for things like, should it be 30% arrivals to the fours? Should it be 40%? Things like that. This committee has not addressed that. Now, everyone talks like we're going to, but let me remind you, this is all supposed to be wrapped up in June of 2016, and the money's being spent. So we don't even have that information. One of the things that has bothered me is, and Irene has spoken about this too, is most of us, I'm very familiar with where the planes are flying over us. But for example, one of the, Mr. Johanning brought up that there are these communities that seem to have the high complaint rates, and Winchester is one of them. I have no clue what's bothering Winchester. So how am I, as a committee member, able to fairly assess whether or not they're being overburdened? Some other community is not. We don't know where the planes are flying. We've not been given that information, even though this committee has been asking for it since January. And yet,
Gerald's been asking for it for 3 years, Cindy.
okay. The official motion, I think, was January, but it just, and, you know, what's happening is that, I know at the last meeting, part of what got me concerned about this is that something was said about the consultant wants his payment for test 2. And I'm just concerned, we're gonna run out of money, we're gonna be left with half of a report. A majority of people representing other communities are going to say, yeah, things are kind of good for us, and we're going to be stuck with something that is not good for us, and yet this they get to say this community has decided that this is a good way of dispersing the planes. So we are supposed to be looking at runway end use. We have not. We've only looked at, is the FAA capable of switching configurations? The problem with that is that they allow, they actually encourage the switch to the 4s as a good thing. They also completely ignore that the 27s and the 33Ls are basically the same departure pass for the southbound route. And so that's really not a switch for Milton, but they get to count it as a switch.
So when we met with Cindy as a board, I thought these were good recommendations and we should follow through on them and see to the extent that we can get this committee involved. And we talked about putting this in the, I know we're gonna get to the goals and objectives later, but incorporating this into the goals and objectives for the committee. It does seem to me that the paper trail argument is a good one, and maybe we combine the 3 of them into, the first one is to request a meeting, and then the second one is to oppose the design. I'm thinking that we could combine 1 and 2 into a letter that sets forth what we think the flaws are, and Cindy would have to provide a written description of that. And whether it's asking them to come out to a meeting or to respond to us in writing or stop, Cindy says to stop immediately and develop a new plan. So I think there's alternate relief we could ask for in the letter, but I do think we should at least work on a draft, see if Karis is comfortable with it, ask Karis to weigh in on it. Perhaps it could be a combined effort of Cindy, a member of our board, or a member of the committee, so that we have a little group working on it and have Karis help us with it, since you're very familiar with it. I'm willing to help from the Board of Selectmen unless either of the 2 of you would prefer to do it, but I think that's a good course of action. That as we're writing the letter, we can flesh out some of the issues a little bit more and run them by legal counsel.
Yeah, I like that. And my recommendation that we stop immediately, I realize that's a bit extreme. It's just, but I am concerned about, they're just spending money, and
we have to make the ask and then let them respond to us.
It what?
It has been stopped. Gerald sent them a letter basically stating that until we get all the data, we have no data for phase 1, we have no data for phase 2, complete. Test 1 that was done, we don't have the complete data for, so there's no real analysis done for test 1. We have even less data for test 2, and he said that the phase 3 is not gonna start at all until we get that data from test 1 and test 2, because you can't even start to think about how you would design test 3 until you get the data from phase 2.
The microphones can't pick up.
Yeah. So, yeah, I actually have the data from test 1. I don't have it from test 2. So, well, I think the only difference, it's not combined. So anyway.
But we can flesh some of these issues out as we're working on the letter. So maybe.
And it's a law, Lands 3 is a law.
Excuse me, Irene, I'm sorry, you can't be picked up from the microphones, and it's a public meeting. It's usually only the boards that are taking part in the discussion, so, but we can involve other people as we're working on an end product here.
Oh, can I ask another question?
Sure, go ahead.
Cindy, so weren't the Bland's Phase 1 and Bland's Phase 2 also really flawed? And weren't they the cause of what we're experiencing today? Like, there must have been something in those two.
I shouldn't speak with any authority on that, but that's my understanding too. I know from talking with others, that seems to be the case. But like I say, I have not studied the information from Bland's 1 and Bland's 2. I do know from looking at maps of the different flight paths that, yeah, they seem to kind of shift from being, say, more over Braintree to now just being over us, or being in, other directions and just kind of shifting towards us.
Yeah. I have the report of, Bland's too, and I did look at it, and, well, I mean, it's really dense and very, hard to, but it does seem like they were increasing the DNL in some areas, and they knew it, and maybe instead of having, like, everyone having a little bit of, noise, they were aiming to concentrate it. And I think Milton suffers because they like to use these numbers. They like to say, well, we move the noise away from an area of high population concentration. And because we're, kind of a more suburban town and people have lawns, we're not as heavily concentrated as some areas. So that's kind of a problem, though.
It is holes in that theory, because then you go to Hyde Park and then you go to Dorchester,
Right.
and you have
Right. There, yes, yeah, and people who have lawns, stand to lose more,
Right. You can't use
too,
them.
because that's part of our property value. So there's also another angle to look at.
Yeah, well, and even this end run use that I was talking about, there's some talk about not just counting them, like you might think to do, how many went over Milton, but to use a population-weighted number, which would do exactly what you're talking about. It would penalize you for having a lawn. And so that's another, I mean, in some ways, from a broad view, it makes sense to think about how many people are you torturing, and let's try to limit that. But it does have a consequence for Milton. And